"You're the colonel?" That's what my father's boss said. When I walked into the boardroom, in full ribbons, he looked up from the presentation slides, blinked, and realized I wasn't just the dot. I was the one with the power to approve or shut down the very contract they'd spent 6 months preparing. My name is Camille Rhodes. I'm 38, a full colonel in the United States Army, specializing in cyber warfare and advanced defense strategy. Right now, I serve as the Pentagon's lead liaison for Project Atlas, a multi-million-dollar military integration program. Tomorrow, I'll sit across from my father and my older brother Dylan in a high-stakes meeting they think they're leading. But what they don't know is that I'm the one with final authority. Tonight, I'm back home, Atlanta, Georgia. The same street I grew up on. The same cracked driveway. Same house with the peeling white trim and tired porch swing. Inside, my mother setting the table. Roast beef. Mashed potatoes. Same meal as always. Same seat for Dylan at the head. Same stories about his latest promotion. No one asks what I've been doing. No one mentions the uniform folded neatly in my suitcase upstairs. They just ask if I'm still moving around so much. And I smile. Politely. Because tomorrow, when the CEO turns to me and says, "Colonel Rhodes, shall we begin?" no one will be able to ignore who I've become. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Drop a Me Too your story. Or just a quick comment, we're listening. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to hit that like button or share it forward. You never know who might need to hear it today. It had been almost a decade since I last spent the night in my childhood bedroom. And yet, everything felt frozen in time. The same bookshelf filled with dusty yearbooks, faded ribbons from science fairs, and high school trophies no one remembered. On the wall hung the acceptance letter to Harvard Business School, framed in gold. I never used it. My father had put it there himself, back when he still believed he could decide what my future would look like. I lay on the bed that night, staring up at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly overhead. Downstairs, I could still hear the faint clink of wine glasses. Laughter. Dylan's voice loud and proud. My mother's soft chuckle. My father's steady baritone smooth with pride. As if the dinner had gone perfectly. As if nothing, no one was missing. They still didn't know. Not about my deployments overseas. Not about the cyber breach I helped stop, one that nearly took down 2 federal networks. Not about the nights I spent curled up on server room floors in sub-zero temps, guarding data that could change national security. Not about the award I received at Fort Meade, or the lives I helped protect with decisions I made when no one was watching, because they never asked. When I first left for the Army, I called every week, left voicemails, sent photos. I invited them to my commissioning ceremony, to my deployment send-off, to my promotion to major. Nothing, not even a "we're proud of you." After a while, the silence stopped hurting. Just became part of the background, quiet echo I learned to live with. And now here I was, back in this house, on the eve of something they couldn't ignore. Before heading to bed, I wandered into the hallway. The family photo wall was still there, crowded and carefully curated. Dylan's college graduation, Dylan's wedding, Dylan's kids, his career milestones, each in glossy frames. And in the bottom corner, crooked, faded, and nearly hidden, my commissioning photo. I reached out and wiped the dust off the glass with my sleeve. Not out of sentiment. Out of clarity. Let them remember. Let them see what they chose to forget. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Old habits die hard. I tied my hair back with precision. Pressed my uniform flat. Checked every ribbon, every pin. The silver eagle on my chest gleamed. I wasn't dressing for them. I was dressing for myself. At 7:45 sharp, I stepped into the black SUV the Pentagon had sent. No music. Just the quiet hum of purpose. As we pulled into the front lot of Novogrid Technologies, my father's empire, I took one long breath. Inside, the security guard at the front scanned my badge. He looked up, then stood. Straight as a board. "Good morning, Colonel." I nodded once. "Thank you." Upstairs, the elevator opened directly onto the executive floor. And there he was. Dylan, tablet in hand, suit pressed sharp. Confidence etched into every line of his face. Until he saw me. He blinked. "Camille? What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I walked past him, my heels tapping calmly against the marble tile. The hallway opened into the main boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Polished wood table. Dozens of chairs. Men and women in tailored suits stood in quiet conversation. At the head of the table was Mr. Langston, the CEO of Novagrid, my father's boss. He looked up as I entered, then rose slightly from his seat. His eyes scanned my uniform, my insignia, my rank. And then he said it. Colonel Rhodes, he nodded. I wasn't aware you'd be attending in person. I returned the nod. Thought it was time. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Dylan's expression. His mouth opened slightly, then shut again. And my father's eyes, they flicked to the placard in front of me, then back to my ribbons. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. The room fell silent. Executives turned. Whispering stopped, movement froze. And slowly, deliberately, I walked to the head of the table. To the seat with my name on it. My name already printed on the placard. No one had to ask who I was anymore. And for the first time in years, no one could speak over me. The meeting lasted just under 2 hours. In that time, I asked 6 technical questions. 5 of them, Dylan couldn't answer. One my father tried to field and fumbled. Turned toward me with a notebook open, pen poised. Another executive nodded subtly as I broke down the cross-platform risk. As if to say, finally, someone gets it. Respect didn't come from fear. Came from clarity. I gave no reactions. No condescension. No smirks. No vengeance. Only structure. Protocol. Clarity. When it ended, Mr. Langston shook my hand again and said, "Your presence changed the energy in the room. In a good way." I nodded. That was enough. By the time I got back to the house, the sky was dimming and the porch light was already on. Inside, the familiar smell of lemon cleaner and roast chicken greeted me at the door. My mother was in the kitchen, humming something soft. When she saw me, she didn't smile, just nodded and went back to slicing carrots. Dinner was quiet. Dylan poked at his plate like it had betrayed him. My father cleared his throat twice but said nothing of value. No one mentioned the meeting. No one said the word Colonel. It was as if they were pretending it hadn't happened, like rewriting history in real time. I watched them through the soft flicker of candlelight, like I was watching a rerun of a show I used to believe in. Every glance, every silence felt like a line I'd already memorized. Only this time, I wasn't a character desperate to belong. I was the audience, detached, observing. At one point, my mother said, "I heard traffic was bad near Midtown today." I said, "Not for me." The silence that followed was deafening. After the dishes were cleared, I slipped away to the back porch. The old swing was still there. Still crooked on one side. Still squeaky every time it moved. I sat down slowly, letting the night air wrap around me. Inside, I heard them talking in hushed tones. I didn't listen. I'd stopped trying to decode their silences years ago. Then the door creaked open. "Camille," my mother's voice. I didn't turn around. "Out here." She stepped outside, holding 2 mugs of tea. Handed one to me. "I didn't know how to act," she said. I sipped the tea. It was too sweet but warm. "You didn't have to act. Just acknowledge." She sat beside me, the swing groaning under our combined weight. "I always thought you were angry." I said honestly, "But not for the reason you think." She waited. "I wasn't angry that you didn't approve. I was angry that you didn't even try to understand." She let out a breath. "You always looked so sure of yourself. Like you didn't need anything from us." I turned to her, finally. "I needed you to show up. Even when I didn't ask." She blinked fast, trying to hold back tears. "I saw you today," she said. "In that room. You didn't look like a little girl playing soldier. You looked like someone people listen to." I didn't respond. She placed her mug down on the railing. "Your father's shaken," she added. "He's not used to being the second most powerful person in a room." That made me laugh softly. "Neither is Dylan." She smiled at that. For the first time in years, the silence between us felt gentle. Not empty. Before going in, she said, "I'm sorry. I know it's late, but I'm sorry anyway." I looked up at the stars, then down at the tea in my hands. "I'll take that," I said. "One apology. It's a start." That night I stayed up late. I opened my laptop and reviewed the day's notes. Adjusted timelines. Flagged gaps. I worked not out of spite, but because I was good at this. And because I had earned this place, I didn't need them to say it. But I also didn't mind if they finally did. There's a strange kind of grief in realizing you've already outgrown the validation you once begged for. But sometimes it still lingers. Not as a wound, just a shadow. And that shadow softens when someone finally sees you, fully. The next morning, I came down to find my father sitting alone in the kitchen. He was holding a newspaper but not reading it, just staring. When he heard my footsteps, he folded it and set it aside. "You made an impression yesterday," he said. I poured a cup of coffee. "That was the job." He nodded. "Langston said your assessment saved them 6 months of backtracking. Protocol matters." He chuckled, dry, unfamiliar. "Apparently." Then he added, "You ever think about working with us? Not as family, as a professional." I raised an eyebrow. "Would you have asked me that 3 days ago?" He hesitated. "No." "Then the answer is no. Not right now." He nodded again. "That's fair." He didn't say it outright, but it was there in his posture and his tone. The beginning of something. Not reconciliation, but recognition. And for once that was enough. There are conversations that never happen in some families. Not because the words aren't there, but because the people you wish would ask don't want to know the answers. That was always the story in our house. They never asked why I chose the Army over Harvard. They never asked what it felt like to go through basic, surrounded by strangers, waking up to shouting instead of coffee. They never asked what it cost me physically, emotionally, mentally, to stay in when so many others gave up. They asked about promotions, but only Dylan's. They asked about success, but only the kind they could measure with LinkedIn titles. I used to think that if I just tried hard enough, they'd notice. When Dylan was struggling with calculus, I stayed up late tutoring him, even when I had finals the next day. When Dad worked weekends, I'd wait by the door with a notepad full of questions about business strategy, hoping he'd see I was curious. But the answers never came. Just a pat on Dylan's back, and silence for me. When I first deployed to Qatar, I called home. No one picked up. When I got injured on base, just a torn ligament, but painful enough, I emailed my mother. She replied 2 weeks later. "Hope it heals soon." Dylan's team just closed their third quarter ahead of projections. When I made major, I sent them a photo. Me in dress blues, silver oak leaf gleaming. My father's reply? A thumbs up emoji. So I stopped sending updates. And they stopped noticing I ever had. But inside Novagrid, the world had shifted. I spent the next 2 days overseeing integration assessments, reviewing code pipelines, auditing access protocols. Each time I stepped into a department, the air changed. People stood taller, spoke clearly, prepared. They didn't see a daughter. They saw the rank, the authority, the competence. And slowly word spread. By Thursday morning, I walked into the elevator and 2 interns whispered, "That's her." As if I were folklore. At lunch, a young engineer stopped me near the cafeteria. "Colonel Rhodes? Sorry, I just wanted to say, it's kind of incredible seeing someone like you in your position. My sister's ROTC right now. She doesn't think she can lead someday. I'm gonna tell her about you." I smiled. Tell her she already is. Just keep going. Moments like that, they made up for everything else. Later that evening, Dylan knocked on my door. He looked different. Not defeated, but smaller. He stood in the doorway for a few seconds before speaking. "You remember that time Dad canceled your going away dinner?" I raised an eyebrow. "Which time?" He winced. "Fair. But I meant the night before you left for Kuwait." I nodded. He said Dylan just closed his first big contract and wanted to celebrate instead. He looked down. I remembered that. But I didn't say anything. I just went along with it. I waited. "You know, I used to tell myself you'd drop out in basic." He looked away. "Not because I thought you were weak, but because the idea of you making it, rising through the ranks, made me feel small." He let out a slow breath. "And then you came back. A full colonel. And I realized. I wasn't proud. I was intimidated." He paused. "You made me look in the mirror and I didn't like what I saw. That caught me off guard." I studied him. The brother who had always been the golden child. The one who never had to ask for attention because it was always offered. And now here he was, looking at me not as a rival, but as someone he owed the truth to. I softened. Just slightly. Thanks for saying that, I said. He gave a tight nod. You're kind of terrifying in a boardroom, by the way. I smirked. Only when necessary. He chuckled. I think you're exactly what this project needed. What this company needed, honestly. Then with a breath he added, and maybe what this family needed too. It was the first real thing he'd said to me in years. Not wrapped in competition. Not polished for performance. Just honest. Before he left, he said, if you ever wanted to teach the integration team a few things, I'd back that. I nodded. Maybe one day. And I meant it. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because for the first time I felt like I didn't have to anymore. Friday morning began differently. My father knocked on my door. Not with his usual sharp knock that carried weight and command, but a hesitant, two-tap gesture that almost sounded like a question. I opened the door to find him standing there in a polo shirt instead of a suit, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought maybe you'd want the good stuff, he said, lifting the mug. I stepped aside to let him in. We sat in silence for a while. The mug was warm in my hands and the quiet between us felt strange, like we were waiting for someone else to speak first. Finally, he said, I read your Fort Meade citation. I looked at him, surprised. You did? He nodded. Langston forwarded it to me. Said he thought I should see it. I waited. I didn't want to fill the silence for him. It was impressive, he said. What you did. What you stopped. That kind of breach, it could have changed everything. I nodded. It almost did. He stared down at his coffee. I never thought, he stopped, corrected himself. No. I never let myself think that you were building something real. Because it wasn't what I understood. And I didn't want to admit I didn't understand it. That landed heavier than I expected. He continued. You weren't the one who failed. I was. I chose what made me comfortable over what made me curious. I watched you leave and convinced myself you were wrong. It was easier than admitting I might be. I stayed quiet. He looked up. But you came back anyway. And you didn't rub it in. You just showed up. Calm. Clear. Professional. I tilted my head. That's what leaders do. He let out a low breath. Yeah, I suppose it is. We sat there for another few seconds and then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. Langston wants to publish a joint press piece. Pentagon cooperation. Private sector transparency. He wants to feature you. I raised an eyebrow. You okay with that? He chuckled. You think I'm gonna stop the Pentagon from being proud of my daughter? That word, daughter, landed differently this time. With weight. With warmth. With acknowledgement. I nodded. Fine by me. He stood and paused at the door. I know it's too late to ask for permission to be proud. But I am. That stayed with me the rest of the day. At headquarters, my meetings were smooth. Department leads no longer stumbled over my title. They came prepared. Respected the process. Even Dylan's team had implemented 2 of the changes I'd flagged without pushback. Progress. That evening, I found myself back at the photo wall. Only this time, something was different. My commissioning photo had been moved. It now hung next to Dylan's college graduation. Same size. Same frame. Same level. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't need to. At dinner we laughed. Not the polite, performative kind. Real laughter. My mother asked if I still liked apple pie. I said yes. She made it from scratch. Later, Dylan offered me a tour of a new system design. Asked for feedback. Listened. And for the first time I saw him not as competition but as a colleague. As someone who had also grown. After dessert my father raised a glass. To Colonel Camille Rhodes, he said, who reminded us all that leadership isn't about being followed. It's about being earned. The room fell quiet. And then they toasted. Even me. 6 weeks later I was back in Washington, D.C. My apartment overlooked the Potomac, the skyline always humming with motion. Inside, everything was where it should be, neatly ordered, efficient, and quiet. A far cry from the energy of my parents' house. But I found comfort in the calm. Since returning, I'd been reassigned to a new cyber initiative and Project Atlas was moving forward with NovaGrid, under stricter oversight, and with new layers of protocol I'd personally helped implement. My name was on the memo, and this time it wasn't buried in the appendix. I hadn't heard much from my family since I left. A few short messages. One from my mother thanking me for coming home. One from Dylan asking about a training module I'd once mentioned. And then a week ago, I received a package. No return label. Just a manila envelope. Inside was a framed printout of the joint article Novagrid and the Department of Defense had published. My name. My photo. Centered between General Weston and Mr. Langston. Tucked behind the frame was a handwritten note. From my father. It read, "This is on the wall outside my office. Thought you might want one too." No flourish. No overstatement. Just a quiet offering. That meant more than 1,000 apologies. And then 3 days ago I got a call. "Hi, honey," my mother said. "We were thinking. Thanksgiving. Would you consider hosting this year?" I paused. "Here?" She laughed nervously. "If that's okay." We thought, new chapter. New space. I agreed. And that's how I found myself on a crisp November morning in my own kitchen, checking on a turkey that refused to cook evenly. My father arrived first. He brought wine and a new tie. Dylan came next, arms full of store-bought sides. I never pretended to be the cook. He joked. Even my mother looked different, less performative, more grounded. She handed me an apple pie. "Still your favorite, right?" I nodded. It always was. We sat around my table, plates full. Voices overlapping. Stories were told. Not about titles. Not about bonuses or press coverage. Just stories. Memories. My father asked me about my next post. I told him I wasn't sure yet. That for the first time in years, I wasn't planning months ahead. And that felt okay. After dinner, Dylan and I stepped onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered across the water. He handed me a small flash drive. "What's this?" I asked. "Our new system update. Based on your suggestions." I named the framework Rhodes Protocol. I blinked. "You're kidding." He smiled. "Figured it was time something here had your name on it, too." I held the drive in my hand, thumb brushing over the edge. It was small, but it meant something. That night, after everyone left, I stood in the doorway of my living room looking at the table we had shared. I hadn't needed their approval, but I had earned their respect. And more importantly, I had redefined what family could look like. One boundary, one conversation, one quiet return at a time. A few months later, I was invited to speak at the Joint Women's Leadership Symposium in Arlington. It wasn't something I planned to accept. I had always preferred action to spotlight, quiet execution to public attention. But something about this invitation felt different. The topic? Redefining leadership in unseen spaces. So I stood on that stage in front of hundreds of service members, veterans, and civilian leaders, and I told them a version of my story. Not all of it, but enough. I spoke about the cost of being overlooked, about the strength required to keep building when no one claps for you, about showing up anyway. And afterward, people came up to me. A young woman from Missouri who had just been passed over for her first promotion. An Air Force colonel who hadn't spoken to her father in 11 years. A civilian engineer who said, "You made me want to start again." That night, I returned to my apartment and sat with all of it. The applause. The memories. The weight of having lived it all alone for so long. I walked over to the bookshelf. There, between a framed mission commendation and a coin from Cyber Command, was the family photo from Thanksgiving. It wasn't perfect. My father was blinking. My mother had red wine on her blouse. Dylan's kids were mid-scream. And I looked like I had just exhaled for the first time in years. And maybe I had. I smiled. Later that week, my commanding officer called. "Camille, we've got an opening. Chief of Strategic Integration. Based in DC, interested." I paused. Not out of doubt, but because I realized I wasn't saying yes to prove anything anymore. I was saying yes because it fit. Because it was mine. Before we hung up, he said, "By the way, that Rhodes Protocol? They're adapting it fleet-wide." I laughed. Of course they are. As I looked out the window at the steady heartbeat of the city, I thought about how far I'd come. Not in rank, not in distance, but in understanding. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep going without applause. To build quietly, to lead gently, and to return not to be seen but to be known. I thought about the girl I used to be, sitting on that peeling porch swing, waiting for someone to notice. She never got the applause, but maybe she grew into the kind of woman who didn't need it. Because who you become when no one's watching That's who you truly are. And when the time comes to walk into the room, you won't have to explain anything. Your presence will say it all.